This chapter is literally a masterclass in sudden, drastic shifts in power. In just 29 verses, we're going to see a peasant woman regain her lost lands through pure providential timing. We'll see a weeping prophet foresee immense devastation, and we'll witness a brutal, quiet assassination in a foreign court that completely reshaped the entire political landscape of the Middle East. Welcome to the Partardez channel. Today we explain Prophets Kings 2, chapter 8 in a clear and simple way, step by step.
Okay, let's just take a quick look at our agenda for today. First, welcome and chapter context. Second, the Shunammite woman returns. Third, Elisha wept in Damascus. Fourth, kings of Judah rule. Fifth, chapter clarifications and themes. And finally, we'll wrap up with practical lessons and recap.
Section 1. Welcome and chapter context. Just to quickly set the stage and remember where we are, we're right in the era of the divided monarchy. Israel is in the north, Judah is in the south, and the prophet Elisha is out here performing these incredible, undeniable physical miracles.
So let's dive right into this with Act 1, the Shunammite woman returns. We are reconnecting with a familiar face, a wealthy benefactor whose son Elisha had miraculously brought back to life in a previous chapter. Now, starting off in verses 1 through 3, Elisha actually comes to this woman with a pretty dire warning. He tells her, "Go away with your family and stay for a while wherever you can, because the Lord has decreed a famine in the land." And he makes it clear, this isn't going to be just a short, seasonal drought. Elisha specifically tells her that this famine will last for a severe 7 years. Now, the woman, she doesn't hesitate. She trusts the prophet's word completely. She literally packs up her entire household and journeys to the land of the Philistines, and she stays there for exactly 7 years, just trying to survive the devastation. And here's where we see a brilliant, almost unbelievable illustration of divine timing, right here in verses 4 through 6. So the 7-year famine finally ends, and she returns to Israel. But as you might expect, her land and her house had been taken over by others while she was gone. So she goes straight to the king of Israel to petition for her property back. Now, on the exact day, literally the exact moment she walks into the royal court, the king happens to be talking to Gehazi, who was Elisha's servant. The king had just asked Gehazi, "Hey, tell me about all the great things Elisha has done." And right as Gehazi is telling this incredible story of how Elisha brought a dead boy back to life, the Shunammite woman and that very boy walk into the room. You can't script that better. Gehazi points and says, "This is the woman, my lord the king, and this is her son." The king turns to her, asks her to verify the story, and she does. The king is so moved by this whole undeniable coincidence that he assigns an official to restore not only her house and her land, but get this, all the income generated from her fields during the entire 7 years she was away. Just an incredible moment of restoration.
Moving right along to Act 2. Elisha weeps in Damascus. We're traveling north now to Aram, where King Ben-Hadad is gravely ill.
So in verses 7 through 10, we learn that King Ben-Hadad of Aram hears that Elisha is in town. He's desperate, so he sends his top official, a man named Hazael, to intercept Elisha. And he sends him with 40 camel loads of the finest wares of Damascus. That is a massive, incredibly lavish gift, all just to ask the prophet one question: will he recover from his illness? Elisha tells Hazael, "Go tell the king he will certainly recover." But then he adds a twist. Elisha reveals that the Lord has shown him the king will actually die. What happens next in verses 11 through 13 is just chilling. Elisha stares at Hazael. He just fixes him with this intense, unblinking gaze for so long that Hazael actually starts to feel deeply uncomfortable and ashamed. It's just this incredibly heavy, silent moment. And then the man of God begins to weep. When Hazael finally asks why he's crying, Elisha delivers a horrifying prophecy. He says, "Because I know the harm you will do to the Israelites. You will set fire to their fortified places, kill their young men with the sword, dash their little children to the ground, and rip open their pregnant women." Hazael acts completely shocked by this. He says something like, "I'm a mere dog. I'm incapable of such massive feats." But Elisha doesn't argue. He simply states, "The Lord has shown me that you will become king of Aram." And verses 14 and 15 detail exactly how Hazael's sudden takeover of the Aramean throne actually goes down. The sequence of events here is incredibly fast and just completely ruthless. Step 1, Hazael returns to his master, King Ben-Hadad. Step 2, when the king asks what Elisha said, Hazael outright lies. He looks at him and tells Ben-Hadad that he will certainly recover, giving the sick king a completely false sense of security. Step 3, the very next day, Hazael takes a thick cloth and soaks it in water. And finally, step 4, he spreads that heavy, wet cloth over the king's face, quietly and violently suffocating him. It's quiet, it leaves no marks, and just like that, the king is dead, and Hazael immediately succeeds him as king of Aram. He perfectly and literally fulfills the very first part of Elisha's dark prophecy.
Let's pivot south for Act 3, Kings of Judah Rule. We are shifting our focus to see how a catastrophic marriage brings northern corruption right straight into the royal court.
In verses 16 through 18, we are introduced to Jehoram, who is the son of Jehoshaphat. He begins his reign over Judah at the age of 32, and he rules in Jerusalem for 8 years. But here's the catch. Unlike his righteous father, Jehoram walks in the ways of the kings of Israel. Why? Well, he married a daughter of Ahab. And Ahab, if you remember, was the notoriously wicked king of Israel. So by marrying into this family, Jehoram basically imports the corrupting, idolatrous influence of the north directly into the royal court of Judah. He's actively doing evil in the eyes of the Lord. Now, given this blatant, in-your-face introduction of evil into the southern kingdom, a really natural question arises in verse 19. Why didn't the Lord just wipe out Judah right then and there? Well, the text gives us a very clear, specific answer. It was for the sake of his servant David. Generations prior to this, God had promised to maintain a lamp for David and his descendants forever. It was solely this historical promise that preserved the kingdom of Judah from total destruction, despite Jehoram's immense wickedness.
Now, just because God spared the kingdom overall, well, that doesn't mean there weren't massive, literal consequences for Jehoram's evil. In verses 20 through 24, we literally watch his kingdom begin to fracture. Edom, which was a territory previously subject to Judah, rebels and sets up its own king. So Jehoram attempts a military campaign to go crush this rebellion. He marches out to a place called Zair with all his chariots, but it's a disaster. The Edomites surround him. While Jehoram manages to barely break through enemy lines by night to escape, his army is utterly defeated and flees back home. And the text makes a point to note that Edom has been in permanent rebellion against Judah to this day. Simultaneously, while this is all happening, a city named Libnah also revolts. So when you look at Jehoram's 8-year reign, it's totally characterized by loss, shrinking borders, and failure. It finally ends with his death and his burial in the city of David.
So following Jehoram's death, we meet his son in verses 25 through 27. Hazael takes the throne of Judah at 22 years old, but his reign is incredibly brief. We're talking lasting only 1 single year. The text places a really heavy emphasis on his lineage to explain his character. It tells us his mother's name is Athaliah, and she is a granddaughter of Omri, the king of Israel. That makes her the daughter of Ahab and Jezebel. Because Hazael is so closely tied by marriage and blood to Ahab's infamous family, he just continues their destructive legacy. He walks right in their ways, doing evil in the eyes of the Lord. It's like a family curse of bad behavior.
And that brings us to the final verses of the chapter, verses 28 and 29, which brilliantly set up the political dominoes for the next stage of history. Ahaziah of Judah decides to form a military alliance with his uncle, Joram, who is the king of Israel. Together, these two march out to war against Hazael. Yes, the exact same Hazael that Elisha wept over, who is now officially the king of Aram. They meet in battle at Ramoth-Gilead. During the fighting, Joram of Israel takes a hit. He's wounded by the Arameans. So he retreats to the city of Jezreel to recover from his injuries. Then Hazael, the king of Judah, leaves Jerusalem and goes all the way down to Jezreel to visit his wounded uncle. This fateful visit puts both of these kings in exactly the same place at exactly the same time. And as you can probably guess, that is going to prove absolutely disastrous in the very next chapter.
All right, Section 5, Chapter Clarifications and Themes. The royal houses of Israel and Judah are deeply, deeply intertwined here, so let's take a second to untangle this web.
Now, what's really interesting here is the sheer confusion of the names themselves. You have a Jehoram who is king of Israel, and you have a Jehoram who is king of Judah, and they are ruling at roughly the exact same time. And to make matters even more complicated, the text often shortens the name Jehoram to Joram for both of them interchangeably. So let's clarify this once and for all. Joram of Israel is the son of Ahab. Joram of Judah is the son of Jehoshaphat, who, as we said, married Ahab's daughter. Because of this massive marriage alliance, it's like the two royal houses basically merged their naming conventions. When you read the text for yourself, you have to pay extremely close attention to which kingdom is actually being referenced, just to understand who is acting at any given moment. It's like a giant puzzle.
When we take a step back and look at the leadership landscape by the end of Chapter 8, the moral status across the board is just staggering. Look at this. Jehoram of Judah reigned for 8 years, and he was evil. His son Ahaziah of Judah reigned for just 1 year, and he was evil. Joram rules over in Israel, and he is evil. Hazael has just ruthlessly taken over Aram, and he is a brutal, evil tyrant.
The political world here is universally dark. The periods of peace and prosperity that we saw in earlier generations, they're completely gone, totally replaced by a web of corrupt rulers leading their nations away from God.
Section 6. Practical Lessons and Recap. So, what does this all mean for us? Let's extract some simple, literal lessons from these ancient events that we can apply to our lives today. First up, we definitely learn to trust in divine timing. The Shunammite woman had no idea how her situation would resolve, right? But she obeyed the prophet, and then she walked into the king's court at the exact second her story was being told. Sometimes just doing the right thing and being patient aligns circumstances in ways we could literally never engineer ourselves. Second, the sheer danger of bad influences. King Jehoram of Judah was the son of a good king, but he chose to marry into a deeply corrupt family. The text explicitly blames this specific relationship for his descent into evil. It's a stark reminder. The company we keep, and especially who we choose to partner with in life, heavily dictates our moral trajectory. Finally, the consequences of evil alliances. Ahaziah allied with a wicked king, which not only led to a failed military battle, but ultimately put him in the absolute wrong place at the wrong time in Jezreel. Compromising our values to align with toxic people, well, it always brings destructive consequences.
All right, let's just do a really quick, unhurried recap so this all sticks. Act 1 beautifully demonstrated God's providence as the Shunammite woman faithfully weathered a terrible 7-year famine and then had all her lands restored due to perfectly timed testimony. Act 2 shifted gears and showed us the very dark reality of human free will and geopolitical shifts. We saw Elisha weep, knowing Hazael would usurp the throne of Aram by suffocating Ben-Hadad and then bring literal terror to Israel. Finally, Act 3 revealed the steep spiritual decline of Judah as Kings Jehoram and Ahaziah brought the wicked idolatry of Ahab's house right into Jerusalem. And that directly resulted in lost territories like Edom and disastrous military alliances.
We leave chapter 8 with 2 kings caught vulnerable in the very same city and an anointed usurper on the warpath. Will God's judgment finally catch up to the house of Ahab? Thank you for learning with us. If this helped you understand the chapter better, like, subscribe, and join us for the next chapter.